They believed they were safe, not cautiously safe, not temporarily safe, but absolutely safe. The kind of safety that settles into the body, loosens discipline, dulls instinct, and convinces men that the worst is already behind them. Trenches were secured. Lines were stable. Intelligence reports showed no immediate threat. The night before had been quiet. Too quiet. And then, without warning, the sky changed color. Here's the question that haunted survivors for the rest of their lives. What do you do when the battlefield doesn't explode? It breathes. At first, it didn't look like an attack. No artillery barrage, no whistling shells, no sudden roar of engines, just a slow, unnatural shift above them. A creeping stain spreading across the sky, thickening into a sickly green haze that caught the light in ways no cloud ever should. Veterans of years of combat stared upward, confused, because nothing in their training matched what they were seeing. This wasn't smoke. This wasn't weather. And whatever it was moving with purpose. The men on the ground did what soldiers always do when something feels wrong but orders say otherwise. They waited. Waiting had kept them alive before. Waiting felt safe. And that hesitation, those few quiet seconds of disbelief, would cost thousands their lives. The color mattered. Green wasn't random. Green wasn't aesthetic. Green was chemistry, physics, and intent made visible. It was a warning that arrived too late to be understood. As the haze descended, it hugged the ground, sliding into trenches, crawling into dugouts, seeping through the smallest gaps in wood, earth, and fabric. Protective walls meant nothing now. Height meant nothing. Distance meant nothing. The battlefield had become three-dimensional in a way no one was prepared for. Breathing, the most automatic act of survival, suddenly became the deadliest mistake a human could make. Some men laughed nervously. Others joked about fog. A few instinctively covered their mouths, driven by something deeper than reason. But there were no alarms, no sirens, no shouted warnings. Command structures hesitated because acknowledging what was happening meant admitting they had lost control of the situation. And in war, the illusion of control is often more valued than truth. Within moments, confusion turned into terror. Eyes burned, throats tightened. Lungs screamed for air that no longer existed. Soldiers stumbled blindly, colliding with one another, clawing at their own uniforms, as if tearing cloth could somehow stop what was happening inside their bodies. Orders dissolved into coughing. Discipline collapsed into instinct. The strongest men fell first, not from weakness, but from exposure. What made it worse was the silence. No explosions, no gunfire, just choking, gasping, and the sound of men realizing too late that the battlefield itself had turned against them. This was not a weapon designed to kill quickly. It was designed to break certainty, to destroy the belief that preparation guarantees survival, to turn safety into a lie. The green sky didn't just kill bodies. It rewired how war would be fought forever. Because once soldiers learned that the air could be weaponized, nowhere could ever feel truly secure again. And as the haze continued to spread, commanders faced a horrifying realization. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a one-time experiment. It was a message, a proof of concept, a declaration that the rules of warfare had just been rewritten, and no one had been told the new ones. If this moment caught you off guard, that's exactly the point. Understanding how warfare crossed this invisible line where the sky itself became a weapon matters more than most people realize. These weren't just tragic deaths. They were lessons written in blood, lessons that still shape how modern conflicts are fought today. If you're following the story so far, leave a comment and tell me what shocked you the most. Was it the silence, the hesitation, or the fact that safety itself became a trap? Your comment helps push the story further and brings these forgotten moments back into the light. And if this kind of deep, unsettling military history matters to you, hit the like button so more people can discover it. And subscribe to the channel to stay with us as we uncover how hidden decisions and unseen weapons reshaped the battlefield forever. The most dangerous thing on that battlefield wasn't the weapon itself. It was the belief that protection already existed. Long before the sky turned green, soldiers had been trained to trust in structure. Trenches were deeper than ever. Dugouts were reinforced. Gas masks, when available, were stored neatly, often out of reach, because doctrine said they would be used only after warning, and warnings, everyone believed, would always come in time. That belief was wrong. Military safety is rarely about absolute protection. It is about probability, about reducing risk to an acceptable level. But what happened here shattered that logic completely. The men felt safe not because they were safe, but because nothing had violated their expectations yet. The front lines were static. The enemy had gone quiet. Intelligence officers reported no artillery buildup, no troop movements, no visible preparation for attack. Silence was interpreted as stability. Stability became comfort. Comfort became carelessness. This is how the illusion formed. Trenches were designed to stop shrapnel and bullets, not the air itself. Dugouts could block blast waves, not chemical diffusion. Officers had been trained to recognize threats that arrived violently, explosions, charges, aircraft. But this threat arrived politely, almost gently drifting forward instead of crashing down. And because it did not match the visual language of danger, it was not treated as such. For several critical minutes, nothing happened. Men stood upright instead of sealing positions. Lookouts stared instead of alerting. Command posts debated instead of acting. Those minutes mattered more than any later decision, because once the gas reached full concentration, options disappeared. No maneuver, no bravery, no discipline could reverse what had already entered the lungs. The structure of military command made this worse. Orders flowed downward, but uncertainty flows upward. Junior officers hesitated to escalate what they couldn't explain. Senior officers demanded confirmation before reacting. Each level assumed the one below had misinterpreted something. Ordinary, fog, smoke, exhaust, anything except the unthinkable. And the unthinkable, by definition, has no protocol. This is where psychology overtook tactics. Soldiers are trained to suppress panic, to wait for commands, to trust the system. That training saves lives in conventional combat. In this case, it killed them. Men who might have fled instinctively stayed in place. Men who might have improvised, delayed action. Authority spoke. By the time authority did speak, breathing itself had become impossible. Another cruel twist made the illusion of safety even stronger. The gas did not kill immediately. The first victims did not collapse dramatically. They staggered. They coughed. They struggled. That ambiguity convinced others that the danger was manageable. It's not lethal, some thought, just uncomfortable. That assumption kept masks off faces and exits unsealed. Every second reinforced the lie. What makes this moment historically devastating is that nothing about it required superior firepower. No technological dominance in weapons. No overwhelming numbers. The enemy exploited something far more reliable. Human expectation. The assumption that tomorrow's danger will look like yesterday's. That war follows patterns. That protection, once established, remains valid. This was the first time many soldiers learned that the battlefield evolves faster than doctrine, faster than training manuals, faster than command structures can adapt. Safety measures are always based on past threats, not future ones. And when the threat changes form, safety becomes inertia. By the time the illusion collapsed, it did so violently. Men realized almost simultaneously that the systems meant to protect them were irrelevant. Trenches became traps. Dugouts became chambers. Orders became noise drowned out by choking. Panic did not arrive suddenly. It spread the same way the gas did, low, slow, and everywhere. And as survivors would later testify, the most terrifying realization was not that the enemy had found a new way to kill. It was that they themselves had helped make it effective by believing they were safe. The green wasn't a symbol. It wasn't metaphor. It was chemistry announcing itself in the most visible way possible. What drifted across that battlefield was not smoke and not fog, but a deliberately engineered mixture designed to exploit how the human body fails under stress. Its creators understood something most soldiers didn't yet grasp. You don't need to destroy armor if you can bypass it entirely. The substance moved the way liquids don't and the way gases shouldn't. Heavier than air. It sank instead of rising, pooling in trenches and low ground where soldiers instinctively sought protection. That alone reversed centuries of battlefield logic. High ground had always been vulnerable. Low ground had always been sheltered. In a single morning, that equation flipped. Here is the first uncomfortable truth. The green color wasn't an accident, it was a feature. Chlorine-based compounds react with moisture in the air and light in a way that produces that unmistakable hue. It wasn't meant to camouflage the weapon. It was meant to be seen. Fear travels faster when it's visible. Confusion multiplies when the threat looks alive. Once inhaled, the reaction was immediate and irreversible. The gas bonded with the moisture in the eyes, throat, and lungs, forming corrosive acids inside the body. Victims described a sensation not of choking, but of drowning while standing upright. Lungs filled with fluid. Oxygen became useless, even when present. Panic accelerated breathing, which accelerated exposure. The body's survival instincts turned against it. Here's the twist no one expected. The first men to fall weren't the inexperienced. They were the veterans, the ones who knew how to hold position, the ones who trusted discipline over instinct. Newer soldiers sometimes ran without orders, fled the low ground, or covered their faces with whatever cloth they had. Veterans waited. Veterans assessed. Veterans obeyed. And obedience, in this case, was lethal. Medical units were unprepared because medicine itself had never encountered this scenario on such a scale. Stretchers filled with men who showed no external wounds, no blood, no shrapnel, just wide eyes, burned lungs, and bodies failing from the inside out. Doctors tried morphine. It did nothing. They tried oxygen. It made things worse by accelerating the chemical reaction in damaged lungs. Another revolta emerged hours later. Survivors who seemed fine collapsed long after exposure. The gas didn't just kill quickly. It maimed slowly. Men walked away from the battlefield believing they had escaped, only to suffocate days later as their lungs filled with fluid in field hospitals. Safety, again, proved to be an illusion delayed by time. The enemy understood something crucial about innovation in war. Effectiveness isn't measured only by casualties, but by disruption. This weapon didn't just remove soldiers from the fight. It broke routines, forced new equipment, slowed offensives, paralyzed command decisions. Every army watching realized they had no answer ready, and worse, no warning system that mattered. Masks existed, but doctrine assumed time. Time to identify, time to issue commands, time to prepare. This attack erased time from the equation. It arrived without sound, without explosion, without a clear beginning. By the time officers recognized the threat, the air itself had already done its work, and perhaps the most chilling insight came afterward when analysts reviewed the results. This wasn't a breakthrough born of superior science alone. It was the exploitation of predictability. The attackers didn't invent fear. They simply packaged it in a form that soldiers had never been taught to recognize. The sky turning green was not the real shock. The real shock was realizing how easily the battlefield could be rewritten using nothing more than air, patience, and an understanding of human behavior under uncertainty. The first warning didn't come from officers. It didn't come from instruments. It came from the body itself, subtle at first, then undeniable. A sting in the eyes, a tightening in the chest, an irritation in their throats that felt almost ordinary, easy to dismiss after weeks of damp trenches and corded-filled air. That dismissal proved fatal. What makes this moment uniquely horrifying is that the human body recognized the threat before the human mind did. Soldiers felt something was wrong long before they understood what it was. Breathing became uncomfortable, then painful, then desperate. But pain alone doesn't trigger evacuation in trained soldiers. Pain is familiar. Pain is expected. Pain can be endured. This wasn't pain. It was betrayal. Eyes flooded with tears that wouldn't stop. Vision blurred, not from fear, but from chemical reaction. Men rubbed their faces instinctively, spreading the substance further across skin already burning. Lungs began to seize, not violently, but progressively, like a door closing inch by inch. Each breath delivered less oxygen than the last, yet demanded more effort. Here's where the situation turned irreversible. As oxygen deprivation set in, judgment degraded. Simple tasks became complex. Buckles were found. Straps tangled. Masks, when present, were dropped, worn incorrectly, or applied too late. Some soldiers put them on upside down. Others forgot to remove the plugs. Training evaporated under physiological stress, replaced by raw instinct fighting a threat it could not name. Panic didn't erupt all at once. It spread unevenly, moving through units the same way the gas did. Low, creeping, selective. One man collapsed, clutching his chest. Another dropped to his knees, retching violently. Those still standing watched, confused, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with everything they believed about battlefield injuries. There were no wounds, no blood, no explosions, just men failing. The cruelest part came next. False hope. Some soldiers found that moving briefly into clearer air reduced symptoms. They believed they had escaped. They believed the danger had passed. They removed masks to breathe more freely, unaware that the damage had already been done. The gas had interacted with lung tissue in ways that wouldn't reveal themselves for hours. The body, for a short time, pretended it could recover. This delay turned survival into a gamble. Medics were overwhelmed within minutes. Not by chaos, but by helplessness. They were trained to treat trauma, bleeding, fractures, shock. This was none of those. Victims couldn't be stabilized because the injury wasn't localized. It was systemic, internal, invisible. Stretchers filled faster than they could be cleared, yet many of the men placed on them were still conscious, still talking, still asking what was happening. Those conversations ended quietly. As fluid accumulated in the lungs, speech faded into coughing, then into silence. Men drowned without water. Their bodies fought to expel something they couldn't escape. Oxygen tents were deployed in desperation, unaware that increased oxygen concentrations intensified the chemical reactions already occurring inside damaged lungs. Every decision made under pressure seemed to worsen outcomes. This is where the psychological damage eclipsed the physical. Soldiers, watching their comrades suffocate, felt a new kind of fear. Not fear of dying, but fear of breathing. The most basic human action had become suspicious. Every inhale felt like a gamble. Every exhale came with relief mixed with dread. War had always punished mistakes. This punished existence. Those who survived the initial exposure would later describe a moment of clarity, a sudden, horrifying understanding that the battlefield no longer required bullets to kill them, that the enemy had found a way to reach inside their bodies directly. No cover, no armor, no courage could stop it once inhaled. And as the green haze continued to drift, pooling in places where men still believed they were protected, the final realization set in. This weapon didn't need precision. It only needed time. When the green haze settled in, command didn't fail because officers were incompetent. It failed because the situation moved faster than authority could process. Reality. Military command is designed to manage chaos created by force, explosions, attacks, visible threats. What unfolded here was something else entirely. A crisis without sound, without impact, without a clear enemy to point at. And that ambiguity shattered decision-making at every level. At first, reports conflicted. One unit claimed it was smoke. Another insisted it was a weather anomaly. A third reported men collapsing without wounds. Each message contradicted the last, and the chain of command did what it always does under uncertainty. It slowed down. Verification was requested. Clarification was demanded. Time was spent reconciling data while the air itself continued advancing. Orders arrived too late to matter. Field officers hesitated to give evacuation commands because evacuation itself had consequences. Leaving trenches meant exposure to enemy fire. Abandoning positions risked breakthroughs elsewhere on the line. And worst of all, admitting loss of control risked panic, spreading faster than the threat itself. Many commanders chose silence over decisive action, hoping the situation would clarify on its own. It never did. Communication systems began to break down not because equipment failed, but because the men operating them couldn't breathe. Runners collapsed mid-signals abandoned posts. Telephones went unanswered. Radios crackled with half-finished messages before going silent. Command centers became isolated bubbles of assumption, issuing orders. 2 units that no longer existed in functional form. Here is the critical failure doctrine demanded confirmation, but the weapon erased confirmation. There was no single explosion to reference, no visual marker to define the threat's edge. Officers trained to respond to defined boundaries found themselves paralyzed by something that had none. The gas didn't respect sectors, ranks, or command zones. It flowed wherever gravity allowed. Some officers attempted to impose normal structure on an abnormal situation. Hold position. Wait for further orders. Maintain discipline. Those commands had worked in artillery barrages and infantry assaults. Here they became death sentences. Men who obeyed remained in low ground. Men who waited inhaled more. The battlefield punished obedience with precision. The collapse of command wasn't loud. It was administrative. Decisions stacked on outdated assumptions. Orders written for yesterday's war applied to today's nightmare. By the time, higher command realized what was happening. Lower command had already disintegrated, and the men on the ground were acting independently, not because they wanted to, but because authority had vanished. Then came the most dangerous moment of all: contradictory orders. Some units were told to evacuate immediately. Others were ordered to stay put. A few received both instructions within minutes. Soldiers fled into areas already contaminated, believing they were moving toward safety. Others sealed themselves inside dugouts, trapping the gas with them. Chaos didn't explode. What survivors later described was a terrifying vacuum of leadership. Not betrayal, not cowardice. Absence. They realized no one was in control anymore. The structure they trusted to interpret danger had been rendered irrelevant by a threat that moved too quietly to be managed. And once that realization set in, behavior changed. Men stopped waiting for orders. They followed instinct. They followed whoever seemed to be moving with purpose. Authorities shifted from rank to action. Whoever had a mask, a plan, or even the appearance of certainty became a leader in that moment. Traditional command dissolved into survival hierarchies formed in seconds. The enemy understood this outcome perfectly. The goal wasn't just physical destruction. It was cognitive overload. By introducing a weapon that invalidated established procedures, they forced command systems to fight themselves. Every hesitation multiplied casualties. Every delayed decision increased exposure. The weapon didn't just attack bodies. It attacked organizational logic. Long after the gas dissipated, the damage to command confidence remained. Officers questioned doctrine. Soldiers questioned orders. Trust eroded in subtle but permanent ways. If leadership couldn't protect them from the air, what else had they misunderstood? That question would reshape military thinking for decades. When command collapsed, survival no longer belonged to the best equipped or the highest ranked. It belonged to the fastest minds, the ones willing to abandon doctrine in real time. This was the moment where war stopped being institutional and became brutally personal. There were no manuals for this, no approved responses, only a narrowing window between adaptation and death. Improvisation began with instinctive rebellion. Some soldiers ran uphill for the first time in their lives, abandoning trenches that had protected generations before them. Others soaked cloth in water, urine, mud, anything, and pressed it against their faces, not knowing why it helped, only that it did. A few smashed open ammunition crates to use the wood as makeshift barriers, trying to redirect airflow without understanding diffusion. These actions weren't logical. They were experimental, and in war, experimentation under pressure separates the living from the dead. The most successful adaptations were disturbingly simple. Men who climbed, Men who moved continuously. Men who refused to stay still long enough for the gas to settle around them. Mobility, once dangerous under fire, became protection. Stillness, once discipline, became exposure. Entire tactical assumptions inverted in minutes. Here's the unsettling insight. No one figured it out fully. They merely survived long enough to notice patterns. Those who noticed that the gas hugged the ground began dragging wounded comrades upward instead of deeper into cover. Those who realized enclosed spaces trapped. The threat broke open dugouts with rifle butts, destroying shelter to create airflow. Others deliberately ignited small fires, not to fight the enemy, but to consume oxygen and redirect the gases' movement. Each decision carried risk. Some killed, some saved. But indecision killed almost everyone. Small groups began forming around improvised leaders, not officers, but soldiers who acted decisively. A man who shouted, "Move," and moved first, gained followers instantly. Authority shifted from insignia to behavior. Rank dissolved under chemistry. The enemy never needed to fire another shot. This is where the psychological cruelty deepened. Survival now required break-in habits drilled into men over years of training. Don't leave your position. Don't expose yourself. Don't abandon wounded. Don't disobey orders. And yet, every survivor's story contained at least one forbidden act, a moment where someone did exactly what they were told never to do. Some units survived almost intact because a single individual made a reckless call early. Others were wiped out because discipline held too long. The line between heroism and insubordination blurred completely. Post-war reviews would struggle to categorize these actions because they didn't fit existing moral or tactical frameworks. One of the most effective improvised tactics was also the most desperate: constant movement through contaminated zones. Soldiers learned by accident that brief exposure, while moving, was sometimes less lethal than prolonged exposure while stationary. This turned retreat into a race against saturation. Move faster off, and the body absorbed less. Move slowly, and the gas won. But this adaptation came at a cost. Men left behind comrades who couldn't move. They carried guilt that lasted longer than the war itself. Survivors later said the hardest part wasn't the fear. It was choosing who could be saved in a world where stopping meant dying, and the enemy watched all of it. This wasn't chaos from their perspective. It was data. They observed which behaviors led to survival, which improvisations worked, which didn't. Every adaptation informed the next deployment, the next refinement. War was evolving in real time, fueled by human experimentation conducted without consent. By the time the gas cleared, something irreversible had happened. Soldiers had learned that survival sometimes meant rejecting everything they were taught, that innovation under fire wasn't optional, and that waiting for permission could be fatal. This was no longer a battlefield governed by rules. It was a laboratory where mistakes were punished instantly. The gas didn't leave when the sky cleared. Long after the green haze dissolved, it remained where no one could see it, inside the minds of the men who survived. This was the first time in modern warfare that fear didn't arrive with noise or impact. It arrived silently, settled deeply, and stayed. And that psychological damage proved far more durable than any physical wound. Soldiers returned to positions that looked unchanged. Trenches still stood. Equipment still lay where it had been dropped, but nothing felt safe anymore. Men hesitated before breathing deeply. Some covered their mouths instinctively whenever fog rolled in. Others refused to sleep in enclosed spaces. Even during artillery bombardments, the battlefield had rewired their perception of reality. The most devastating effect was uncertainty. Traditional combat fear is directional. You know where danger comes from. Enemy lines, artillery arcs, aircraft overhead. This fear had no direction. It could come from anywhere, from weather, from silence, from the absence of sound. Soldiers began to fear calm more than chaos. Quiet mornings became unbearable. Any unusual smell triggered panic. Any mist caused units to freeze. This weapon created a condition where anticipation itself became torture. Psychological casualties spiked sharply after the incident. Men who had survived gunfire and bombardment without breaking collapsed under the pressure of waiting for something invisible. Nightmares weren't about explosions. They were about suffocation. Veterans reported dreams where they couldn't scream, couldn't warn others, couldn't run fast enough. They woke gasping, convinced the air itself was hostile. Even trust between soldiers changed. If the air could betray them, what else could? Masks were hoarded. Filters were inspected. Obsessively. Some men refused to remove protective gear even when ordered to do so. Others accused comrades of withholding equipment. Survival instincts eroded cohesion. The gas had turned self-preservation into a zero-sum game. The enemy understood this outcome better than most historians initially did. The weapon's greatest success wasn't the casualty count, it was the paralysis that followed. Units slowed down. Advances hesitated. Commanders delayed offensives out of fear of repetition. The battlefield became cautious, reactive, and mentally exhausted. Here's the deeper shift. War was no longer just about killing. It was about controlling expectation. Once soldiers learned that danger could be invisible, every moment became suspicious. Planning cycles lengthened. Reconnaissance intensified. Decision-makers demanded certainty that could never be guaranteed. The psychological load increased even in moments of safety. The gas weapon achieved what weeks of bombardment could not: persistent mental occupation of the enemy. Some soldiers never returned to frontline duty, not because of injury, but because they couldn't function under the constant anticipation. Military psychiatrists, unprepared for this kind of trauma, struggled to classify it. It wasn't shell shock, it wasn't cowardice, it was something new: fear without stimulus. This moment marked the birth of a terrifying truth. Weapons don't need to kill everyone to win. They only need to make survival feel temporary. Even years later, veterans describe the same sensation when recalling that day: a tightening in the chest, a hesitation before inhaling, a flash of green where there was none. The battlefield had followed them home. What happened under the green sky could not be erased, but it could be buried. And that is exactly what followed. Almost immediately, the reaction from higher authorities was not transparency, but containment, not of the weapon, but of the narrative. The battlefield had revealed something too destabilizing to be openly acknowledged: that modern armies were unprepared for threats that bypassed guns, armor, and courage altogether. Official reports softened language. Casualty figures were fragmented, reclassified, or delayed. Words like suffocation, chemical reaction, and airborne weapon were replaced with vague phrases: unusual conditions, environmental factors, unexpected exposure. The green sky became a footnote instead of a headline. This wasn't accidental. It was strategic. Governments understood that admitting the full truth would trigger panic far beyond the front lines. Civilians were still being told that distance meant safety, that wars happened over there. A weapon that turned the sky itself into a threat destroyed that illusion instantly. If air could be weaponized on a battlefield, it could be weaponized anywhere. So the story was managed. Press access was restricted. Journalists were embedded selectively. Photographs were censored. Letters from soldiers describing what they had seen were delayed or redacted. Families received notifications that mentioned illness or combat complications, never the real cause. The silence was deliberate, and it worked, at least temporarily. But secrecy created its own danger. Because the truth wasn't shared openly, lessons were learned unevenly. Some units received new equipment quietly, others didn't. Some commanders adapted protocols behind closed doors. Others continued operating under outdated assumptions. Knowledge spread through whispers, not doctrine. Survival depended on who knew, not on official policy. Behind the scenes, military scientists and strategists moved quickly. Emergency committees formed, research programs accelerated. New filters, new masks, new detection methods were rushed into development. But publicly, nothing had changed. The world was told this was an anomaly, not a precedent. That lie would shape the next phase of warfare. Internally, debates were fierce. Some officials argued the weapon violated moral boundaries and should never be used again. Others saw opportunity. If one side could do this, so could another. And if it worked once, it could work better the second time. Ethics collided with strategy, and strategy usually won. This is the uncomfortable reality. The same governments that condemned the weapon in public quietly invested in perfecting it in private. International discussions began not to ban the weapon outright, but to control who could acknowledge it. Agreements focused on wording, not prevention. Limits were proposed, loopholes negotiated. The sky turning green had scared everyone, but fear didn't stop development. It accelerated it. Meanwhile, soldiers noticed the gap between what they experienced and what was officially acknowledged. Trust eroded further. When institutions deny lived reality, loyalty fractures. Veterans carried knowledge. They were discouraged from sharing. Silence became part of service. History remembers battles through documents, but documents are written by those who survive politically, not those who suffocate quietly. The truth of the green sky survived not in archives, but in testimony passed from soldier to soldier, warnings disguised as stories. The green sky didn't just mark a tragedy, it marked a pivot. From that moment forward, warfare stopped being defined solely by what you could see, hear, or shoot. It became about what you could anticipate, detect, and survive without ever knowing you were under attack. The battlefield had crossed a threshold, and there was no return to the old rules. Almost immediately, doctrine began to shift quietly at first, then structurally. Armies around the world rewrote their assumptions about protection. Trenches were no longer treated as universal shelter. Low ground was reclassified as a liability. Entire defensive concepts that had dominated planning for decades were downgraded. Overnight, the lesson was brutal but clear. Static safety is a myth. Equipment followed doctrine. Gas masks evolved from optional gear into permanent extensions of the soldier's body. Filters became standardized. Training shifted from reaction to anticipation. Soldiers were drilled not to wait for orders, not to wait for confirmation, but to act at the first sign of abnormality. Hesitation was formally recognized as a lethal variable, but the deeper change wasn't physical. It was philosophical. Military planners realized that innovation didn't need to overpower the enemy. It only needed to invalidate their assumptions. A weapon that forced constant vigilance drained morale faster than continuous bombardment. Psychological exhaustion became a strategic objective, not a side effect. The green sky taught armies how to win without firing. This led to a new class of warfare, where invisibility became the advantage. Detection systems, early warning protocols, and chemical sensors emerged not as enhancements, but as necessities. Entire research branches were created to study threats that left no crater, no blast mark, no immediate proof of attack. Here's the unsettling realization that followed. Once a weapon changes how soldiers think, it has already succeeded. Future conflicts reflected this lesson again and again. Even when chemical weapons weren't deployed, their possibility shaped behavior. Units slowed advances out of caution. Commanders overplanned. Soldiers hesitated before entering terrain that might trap air. The ghost of the green sky influenced decisions without ever reappearing. And it wasn't limited to chemicals. The same logic migrated into other domains: psychological operations, electronic warfare, cyber attacks. If you can disrupt trust, certainty, or perception, you don't need dominance. You only need doubt. The green sky became a template for modern asymmetric warfare: low visibility, high disruption, long-term consequences. Historians often focus on casualty numbers to measure impact. That misses the point. The real damage was strategic. An entire generation of soldiers learned that survival was conditional, not guaranteed by preparation or courage. Safety became temporary. Control became fragile. This precedent forced the world into an arms race, not just of weapons, but of anticipation. Nations invested heavily in detection, prediction, and countermeasures, always one step behind the next unseen threat. Warfare became less about battles and more about thresholds. Who could recognize danger first? And yet, for all the changes it triggered, one truth remained disturbingly consistent. The world never fully closed the door. This moment opened. The most unsettling legacy of the green sky is not that it happened. It's that it never truly ended. Long after treaties were signed, bonds declared, and doctrines rewritten, the logic that made that moment possible remained intact. The battlefield learned that day that the most effective weapons are not always the loudest, the fastest, or the most destructive. They are the ones that change behavior without being seen. What followed was not abandonment, but refinement. Publicly, the world condemned the invisible weapons. Privately, research accelerated. Detection thresholds were lowered. Delivery methods were studied. Dispersal models improved. The language changed, but the objective did not. If a weapon could deny safety, forced hesitation, unoccupy the enemy's mind indefinitely, it was too valuable to forget. The green sky became a blueprint. Future conflicts rarely needed to deploy the same method again. Its existence alone was enough. Soldiers trained under its shadow. Commanders planned with it in mind. Civilians lived knowing that the air itself had once been weaponized and could be again. Fear no longer required execution. It required memory. This is where the danger deepened, because once a weapon becomes psychological, it becomes permanent. You cannot dismantle an idea. You cannot recall a precedent. Every fog bank, every unusual smell, every unexplained illness became a potential trigger. Entire populations internalized the lesson they never experienced firsthand. Safety is conditional. Modern warfare absorbed this lesson completely. You see it in how conflicts are fought today. Emphasis on uncertainty, ambiguity, and plausibility. Attacks that can't be definitively attributed. Effects that unfold slowly. Daman, death, appears environmental rather than intentional. The line between accident and attack blurred deliberately. The green sky taught strategists that denial is as powerful as destruction. And here's the most uncomfortable truth of all. Preparedness did not eliminate vulnerability. It institutionalized fear. Gas masks became symbols not of safety, but of anticipation. Warning systems didn't calm nerves. They heightened them. Every alert reminded soldiers that danger might already be present, already inhaled, already irreversible. Protection came at the cost of constant psychological strain. Even today, the world lives with unresolved questions born under that green sky. How do you defend against something you cannot see? How do you respond without proof? How do you reassure people when certainty itself has been weaponized? Those questions have no final answers. What began as a single moment of shock became a permanent feature of conflict. A reminder that innovation in war doesn't ask permission. That ethics often follow effectiveness, not the other way around. And that once humanity learns a new way to harm itself, that knowledge never disappears. The sky may never turn green again in the same way, but the lesson it delivered still hangs over every battlefield. Every city, every population that believes danger will announce itself loudly. If you stayed with this story until the very end, you already understand something most people never stop to consider, that the most dangerous moments in history often arrive quietly, without explosions, without warnings, and without clear villains. And that understanding matters. If this story changed the way you think about warfare, leave a comment right now and write the word green. It tells the algorithm and the community that you're paying attention, and it helps keep these stories from being buried again. Like this video if you believe history should be remembered in full, not softer or simplified. And subscribe to the channel if you want more deep, unsettling stories about hidden strategies, forgotten weapons, and the moments that silently reshaped how wars are fought. There's another story waiting for you on the screen right now, one that reveals how a single overlooked decision altered the fate of thousands. Click it, stay curious, and keep questioning what you think you know.